Hi everyone, welcome to the Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. This season we're reading Matt Cawthon's perspective. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 27. I'm your co-host, Lajara Dane of the Wide Ch.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Cimaris, a scholar from Ilion. I want to thank all of our loyal listeners, both of you, and remind any newcomers that we often do drop spoilers from other parts of this series during our podcast without any further warning. So please, we advise you to read the entire series before listening to this podcast.
This week we're discussing chapters 3 and 28 from Crossroads of Twilight, and I'm going to get us started with my summary of chapter 3 called A Fan of Colors. The Shanchan soldiers who approached us in our last episode left. All they had wanted was to inspect Luca's horse warrant, and apparently they were satisfied. Matt is sitting around wondering why the dice are rolling in his head again. It's usually never good news. He reassures Oliver that the Shanchan won't be able to catch them, but he wasn't too sure himself. It does seem to ease the boys' worry, though. But then Egyanan approaches him confrontationally to settle their whole two captains issue that we talked about last episode. But Matt is not having it. He immediately shuts down the conversation, saying he was never her hired man anyway. He stalks off, announcing that he's going to visit Tuon, which absolutely flabbergasts Egyanan. How dare he refer to her that way with no title? It's so disrespectful. And the Shanchan woman seems absolutely mortified, which really amuses Matt, because after having unceremoniously kidnapped the daughter of the Nine Moons as they did, he hardly thought respect such as titles really mattered. Bail Doman then pulls Matt aside and warns him that he's in over his head with her. "Oh no, I know exactly what I'm doing. We're not on her ship, and that woman's not going to push me around," he says, referring to Egyanan. "No, you dolt. I'm talking about the High Lady Tuon. What was that whole marriage stuff you were talking about? You're likely to get us killed." Matt assures him that was just a weird joke, and he starts off to Tuon's wagon. Except, not really. Not that he's nervous or anything, but he finds that his feet start taking him elsewhere, strolling through the camp of wagons as people are packing up to leave. It's not that he's scared, but it's just that Tuon's starting to get creepy with how calm she is about everything. And he had no idea how the whole wedding thing was supposed to go down either. When he gets to the wagon, a couple of the Red Arms tell him that everything seems okay inside because they don't hear any screaming or crying. That peace quickly evaporates when Matt enters with a smile plastered on his face, however. His second attempt to get the gumption to go in, by the way. He's not afraid exactly, but he is nervous. Mr. Sinan, Selucia, and Tuon are sharing the wagon, and Tuon starts in on him right away, hissing in anger about the cover story he had spread around. She's absolutely incensed at having been labeled a faithless, thieving servant. She tries to throw the chamber pot at him. She's prevented from doing so by Selucia, but encouraged by Mistress Anan to throw a more expendable mug instead. So the ceramics are really taking a hit inside this wagon. Matt explains it's too late to change the story. There's nothing else he can do. He also explains that he only kidnapped her because he couldn't leave her behind to raise an alarm, so it's really nothing personal. Neither of them brought up the whole marriage issue, and he preferred it that way. He did promise her a safe return home as soon as that's possible, though. Tuon is interested in seeing what his promises are worth, so she calms a bit. But then he blurts out a demand for her to answer a question, which is her age. This just sets her right off again. Apparently she's sensitive about her size and baby face, but according to Randland reckoning, she's 20, about the same age as him, which he's pretty disappointed by. He was hoping he could wait a few years for marriage. This whole time, by the way, she's been calling him Toy, which he corrects every time. He's not putting up with that. His way of getting back at her is to refuse any titles or proper respect for the High Blood at all. She has a few questions for him now, though. 1, where's your ring? I don't know, I just don't wear it all the time. 2, do you remember Hawkwing's face? He freezes in place with a smile on his face at that second one. By the time he answers no, he has already finished reliving one of his many deaths, this time as a man named Kulain, who refused to yield to Hawkwing even as Kulain himself lay dying. Hawkwing laughed at his stubbornness. Matt hated remembering dying. "Well, never mind, that was a foolish question," Tuon says. "I don't know what I'm going to do with you after we leave this place. Maybe make you Dako Vale, even though you're really not cute enough for that. But for now, I promise not to betray you in any way, nor cause dissension among your followers." This declaration shocks Mr. Sinan, Selucia, and Matt into speechlessness. Apparently, Selucia is no problem either. She goes where Tuon does. They spat on their palms to seal the deal, but not without comment from Tuon about their earthy customs. But just then, someone interrupts with a knock on the door. Matt readies himself with knives, but it turns out to be Tom with some news. Nobody seems to know Tuon is missing, just as Egyanan had assured him. The disappearance is very under wraps, and the search probably will be too. As Tuon explains, Suroth is probably ready to kill herself from the shame. She would never let such a damaging secret get out. Further, added Tom, Tylan is dead in a pretty gruesome fashion, which the Shan-Chan are blaming on the Aes Sedai, not on the Windfinders or anybody else. Tuon and Seleucia seem to agree with this assessment, but they explain that evidence is needed for the justice system, even when the charges are brought against slaves. Matt is confused about how he felt for Tylan. He's really upset right now. He definitely knows he feels guilty for having left her helpless for the Golem, though. Once the creature is explained to her by Tom, Tuon raps Matt on the head, reprimanding him for superstition. She just will not have that. But just then, somebody else knocks and interrupts. One of Jolene's warders summons Matt to the wagon where the 3 Aes Sedai are rooming with the 3 Suldam, an arrangement no one seems happy with. Blarick seems concerned about this, despite his gratitude at Matt's rescue of everyone, but that's not why he brought Matt here. Once he's inside the wagon, Jolene explains that they need to break away from the traveling show and head to Ilion instead of Lugard, a view that the other women in the wagon do not share, as it would expose them to the Shan-Chan far too soon. The reason for this change? Up north, there's a massive surge of channeling, something that surely only the Forsaken could be responsible for. They shouldn't be able to feel something like that from this far away, but all the channeling women in the wagon can. But Matt knows right away that it's not a threat. How? From the fan of colors in his mind, indicating that Rand is behind this enormous channeling event. And thus ends Chapter 3, A Fan of Colors.
Again, one of the chapters we run across with Matt where there's not a lot of action. So it's these chapters come across as rather strange and rather un-Matt-like because we're seeing the world through his eyes. And as you pointed out, I never caught it before, but I kind of felt that Jordan writes differently when he's looking through the different characters' points of view. And he writes differently. His style of writing is changed when you're seeing through Matt's eyes and through Matt's points of view. And I tend to like that, but it feels strange when you're going through these with Matt's point of view and it's written that in that style, but there's not a lot of action. I still like it. It's a good chapter. It's one of these growth moments. Some of the things that stood out to me is, again, we keep catching hints and glimpses of Matt's maturity. Again, that seems like an oxymoron, but when he tries to reassure Oliver that the Shan-Chan are not going to come get them and arrest them all, they've done what they had to do, and they're hiding very close to the city in order to stay safe, because the Shan-Chan would assume that they would run as far as they could, as fast as they could. So just the fact that he takes time with Oliver is one of those things I always like about Matt's character and about his interactions with the boy, that he doesn't see himself as a father figure, but he does some of the things you would expect a father to do, which is to be supportive, to try to teach him how to act around women. I'm sorry. That's Matt thinks he is, at least. In his mind, he is. He does try to reassure Oliver. And that's really the biggest thing, is not that he corrects him as a father would correct a child, or sits him down and physically teaches him lessons, reading, writing, or this is how you gamble, or this is how you do this. But he does show him things by example, and he does try to reassure Oliver and give him that emotional support that any young boy craves from a father figure. And
definitely the emotional support. He's giving him validation all the time.
Yes.
Sort of that, as we've talked about before, that validation that Matt really needed from other people, and all it took was just a few comments here and there. Tam Althor, oh, well, that might be an ear about the rock,
Yes.
So I feel that Matt is doing that, and I think he does it well to keep himself together when he's really upset. He's worrying about all this stuff, but Oliver's like, those Shan-Chan aren't going to get us, and Matt keeps it together in front of the kid in order to reassure him, because kids are going to pick up on your energy and your feelings. So, it's good to present to them a sense of safety and a safe sense of authority, even though, you don't know everything and you don't know whether everything's going to work out. Kids need to feel like they're safe. And Oliver's really not in a safe situation, but Matt's doing the best that he can. And I think he did a good job there. I feel like that's fairly mature for a 20-year-old guy seeing as how I teach a lot of folks that age and I'm not too far from it myself, it's just hard to imagine that age group being mature enough to meet a kid's emotional needs like that. But I like this in him.
Yes. And it's like Matt is doing this instinctively. He doesn't stop and think about it. He doesn't intentionally say, well, I'm trying to help the boy here. He just does it. He takes care of him. A lot of it is not that different in how a general would act in front of his troops, because you want to project confidence. You want to project the idea that you know what you're doing, even if you don't, or especially when you don't. And yet still be flexible enough to learn from your mistakes, not be so rigid that you get people killed, over your pride and things like that. So, yeah, I would think that's kind of similar. Maybe he's doing it out of instinct from those old memories. Well, I'm sure many of those men were fathers, and every one of them, had grown up with some type of father figure. So it's as if this is part of Matt's subconscious now, and he's just doing it, and I like that. Again, we get a little bit of Matt's penchant for making a decision, just by acting on it, is wanting to go to Tuon's wagon, and his feet keep taking him somewhere else.
It's not much.
There's not much action in that, but that's what he finds himself doing, making a decision just by the physical reactions that he has, and he really does not want to go face her right then. But I'm glad that he does. It brings me to the next point, though, and I want to ask your opinion on this. Because I have half-formed ideas on it, which has never stopped me from discussing it in the podcast before, but I'm not sure I can define it the way I want to. But it seems to me that different people within the Wheel of Time have differing ideas of what respect is. Matt feels like that Tuon disrespects him because she calls him Toy.
Yeah.
Egyanin thinks he's disrespecting Tuon because he will not use her title and will not, afford her any of the courtesies that you normally would those of the high blood. In fact, he specifically decides he's not going to do any of that.
Yeah.
And Matt he can be very irreverent to a lot of people, but he can be respectful at times too. So,
yeah. But
I guess the thing I wanted, the germ of the idea I had, was just to get your take on what respect is and why different people view it differently. I think that's something current day problem many people have, is not understanding what respect is and how you show it. So I hate to put you on the spot, but I think you're better suited to perhaps verbalize that.
Oh, no, I think it's a great question. I think that people do culturally have very different ideas about that, and you can see this come up in things like parenting and teaching or different types of leadership. Some people might assume that they are just owed respect by virtue of who they are in relation to somebody else, by virtue of their position, whereas other people might think more of respect is something earned, even if you're not even saying what respect is. Those are just two schools of thought that I hear about it a lot. But as far as what it actually is, I would say it's very hard for me to define it without using the word. Because I was about to say, well, respecting other people's boundaries, for example. Understanding, so if I'm trying to rephrase that without using the word in its own definition, I might say something like understanding that your freedom to swing your fist ends where somebody else's face starts.
Yes. Yeah.
So
which is a concept I've heard, but I never equated that to respect. Yeah.
I guess I suppose to me it's more of maybe understanding rights in general and understanding where yours end and others begin, because there always does have to be some degree of sacrifice of your freedom in order to protect other people's, unless you're just a tyrant, right? Who can do whatever you want with any consequences to anyone else. So I think that the respect that the Shan blood are used to being given, for example, is more of that type of respect where they can do whatever they like with people of any lower classes to suit their whims. But other people have to respect that position just by virtue of who they are. Whereas Matt has always had this more folksy air about him, more of a hometown hero kind of guy, or kind of for the little guy, where his view on respect is going to be more like, I'm going to give it to you if you've earned it, which he feels like, for example, Egyanin hasn't earned it. He's like, I'm not on your ship. Literally. He still keeps sticking to that even in this chapter. He was just being a smart aleck before, but now he's like, listen, I'm not on her ship, so she's no captain to me. And she really hasn't done anything to earn that respect. He realizes Ekiana needs me as much as I needed her, and I can't let her know that I even really needed her that bad. So, I don't know. I'm still circling around
Yeah.
this concept a
And
little bit, but I
yes,
think I keep wanting to come back to rights for respect
right.
for some reason.
And one of the things that you outlined, and I had seen this before, but I didn't think of it in this context, but it really does help clear some of that up for me, is the two different main camps of respect.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, some people think respect is something that comes with an office or with a, um, something you just deserve because of where you were born or who you are, whatever the case may be. That's the kind of respect we see in military structures.
Yeah.
If an officer is a total jerk and a scumbag, those people under him still salute him or her because they're saluting the office, the rank, the stripes on the sleeve or whatever is used to denote what that rank is.
Yeah.
Because you have to have a rigid structure in military settings. I mean, you just have to have, if you're going to be successful and keep your people alive, you have to have very rigid kind of social construct
right.
structures there. And so there are places where respect is, because of a person's position. It's that way somewhat on the where you work on the job.
Yeah.
You may not like your boss. They may be a terrible person. They may be terrible at their job. But if they're the ones who approve your paycheck, you still have to show them some level of respect. And usually we struggle to find that line of just enough to keep me employed, but not enough to make them think I really like them. So there's some types of respect that way. I'm a little more like Matt, and I tend to respect people, not just who respect me, but who seem like they're trying. I'm not saying they're a worthy person or a great person, but they at least are considerate to other people. I think your point of rights was dead on with that. They're not trying to infringe on everyone else's rights. For example, I mean, I know this is little tiny things, but I have a lot of disrespect for people who leave the buggy out in the parking lot at a grocery store and don't even try to put it in the little buggy corrals. They just leave it right there where the car was parked. And I mean, that is so, it's like they're disrespecting society, so I have no respect for them.
Yeah. I feel you there. That's the one that gets me.
Yes, it is. And just little small things like that. And a lot of it, just based upon the way I was raised and the way I view work ethics, people who are lazy, I have very little respect for them. Now, of course, as I've grown, I've had to learn some people are not lazy. They're in pain. They are, they're in a situation where they cannot do.
Yeah.
But, for those who can, like I say, you can put your buggy back, or you can at least show courtesy to your waitress, to the people around you, the cashier, whatever setting you're at. You can at least say thank you or please to people. You don't have to bend over backwards and gush all over them, but you can at least have these small courtesies that let a person know you've acknowledged them. You know they exist. Yeah. You acknowledging that they're there, they're helping you in some way. I don't know, I'm still not defining it well, but I have respect for people who do those things. So I think observing other people's rights is one, observing courtesies toward people is a form of respect.
And I suppose showing gratitude for their contributions is something that you use there with your examples that I didn't think of. Right.
Of course, the courtesies can be, that can actually cause disrespect because, again, I respect people who show honesty. And sometimes we can try to be so courteous that we sacrifice honesty. Yeah. But that's a tough balancing act. It's very akin to trying to be funny and uplifting to your coworkers at work without stepping over that line of offending people. And because again, when you say things that make other people uncomfortable, you are infringing on their right to have a safe, comfortable work environment. And sometimes that can be a fine line, and sometimes we can use that line for a jump rope. But I think that many people, we struggle with that. And that's why I wanted to talk about it, to see if we could find some clarity. I think we found a little bit, but we may have muddied the waters more than we helped. But
so I guess respect also has to do with rights, but I guess it has to do with power, with who do you believe is in power, and what do you believe you're supposed to do because of that?
That's a good definition. I like that. Okay. Yeah, I would love to explore this further, but I think we're probably going to lose all of our listeners if we do. But it's a great discussion. Thank you.
If I were to try to put a bow on this thought and bring it back to Matt, I would say that his perspective on respect and power is sort of that he has felt disrespected and powerless at a lot of times in his life, and he's always kind of struggling against forces that have control over him, whether it's Taviran or other people, Aes Sedai, all this other kind of stuff. He's starting to accept a little better, but his perspective on respect has always been one of kind of trying to get more respect of his own without necessarily doing anything nice for people to earn that. He wasn't always known for being altruistic, right? But also just trying to get out from underneath other people's thumbs and not having to, in his view, needlessly respect other people's wishes or other people's wishes for what his life was going to be. He wants more of that self-determination.
Yeah. And it appears, at least on the surface, that Tuon has always expected to have people's respect, simply because of her station, because of who she is. Yeah. Although she's adapting to Matt fairly quickly here.
Yes.
I don't know. I assume she's falling for him even faster than he's falling for her. She knows all of the things that he was brought into her life for a reason. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I started to say prophecies, but in her case, it was not prophecies.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she allows him to get away with a lot more than anyone else would get away with around her.
Yeah.
I mean, Selucia can say things, but Selucia can't do the things that Matt does and keep her head attached to her shoulders, I don't believe. So anyway, yeah, just interesting thought process. I would apologize for taking us off on a tangent, but that's what our podcast is.
Of course. And
it's a tangent with an occasional sticking point to the wheel of time. But it was just something I found so interesting, and I didn't really think about that until you were giving your summary, and it just, I saw this arc of two very different opinions on what respect is, and I found I couldn't define it. So I appreciate you doing so well on that.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my other points that I sort of brought up, but I don't think in a very coherent way in our discussion just now. But I actually really like how he stands his ground with Egyanan here. And, it's also annoying to me how dismissive he is of her and this other stuff in some respects, and what a smart aleck he is. And on the other hand, I like it. I feel divided about it. Like, if that were real life, I would be very annoyed with him, but he's funny and I like our guy Matt. But it also just makes sense that he would stand his ground with her, because she would not be a good leader in this situation. So she does have leadership experience, and she does understand that somebody needs to be the captain. She's not the captain for this ship, so to speak, because we see what a mess she is around Tuon. There's no way she could be in charge of the Tuon situation in any way.
Because instantly Tuon would be in charge of everybody.
Exactly.
Right.
She's already mortified that they have treated her this way and that they've stolen Damane and everything else, even though she's skeptical of the whole Damane thing because she understands the Sualdom's big secret. She is still bought into her own culture enough, which makes sense, very, acculturated for decades into this, that she's not okay with that. And related point, she couldn't manage the Sualdom and Aes Sedai either. So for everybody's safety, Matt has to do this. He's kind of a jerk about it, but somebody's got to keep this entire group together, and he didn't exactly ask for this. There were a lot of people coming to him for help.
Right.
But now that they're here, he's got to keep all these people are his responsibility now. And I just don't think Egyanan would take on that responsibility in that way, or be able to with some of the people.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. That reminds me of a certain Aes Sedai of the Green Aja that intimidates everybody. And sends everybody off on a tangent constantly, intentionally, just to do that very thing, to be able to assert control and be the only calm in the midst of a crazy room.
Yeah.
Cadswain Maladrin is constantly pushing people's buttons, irritating people, saying weird things to throw them off balance, just to be able to control the environment she's in, wherever she is. And Matt is doing basically the same thing instinctively. Again, not really thinking about it. That's just part of his nature. But he does the same thing. I don't think anyone else could have gotten Egyanan to go along with her plans. And basically just by ignoring her when she wants to to leave.
Yeah, and I love the
knowing
way
that she would bully anyone
I
else.
never would have thought of Cadsuane in relation to Matt, but thinking about how she always has to be in control of the situation, and I guess it's, during these middle books when we see her so much, she will do things like very intentionally set up a mirror in the room so that she doesn't have to turn around when people come in, and very intentionally be looking at her embroidery instead of looking at anything else. But she will set things up like that on purpose when she thinks that somebody might come to talk to her. Matt, on the other hand, the way we saw him first talk to Egiana when he was pulled up to her room is he's just gonna casually sit in the chair when he wasn't asked, and he shouldn't do that with somebody at this station. He's going to have his feet up.
Right.
I don't remember exactly if it described the way he was sitting, but I imagine him sitting kind of sideways in the chair with his feet up over the arm and like ankles crossed. I don't know, just...
Right. I think it described it pretty much like that. It didn't go into that kind of detail, but I pictured it the exact same way. And there are cultures where, putting your feet up, showing the bottoms of your feet or the soles of your feet or soles of your shoes is very disrespectful when you do that, when you show that to people. Now, it doesn't point that out about Sion Chan or something, but it's almost as if Matt is intentionally showing her disrespect by those actions. Not just that he had to sit in the chair when he wasn't invited to sit and should not sit in the presence of someone of the blood, but the fact that he had to put his feet up like that, like you said, slouching insolently in the chair, putting his feet up in such a way that if she would take offense to that motion, she's even doubly thrown off.
Yeah. They're both accomplishing the same thing, but Cadsuane is doing it so meticulously, whereas Matt is doing it so casually. And I never would have brought them up as parallels. That's a cool one.
Because they're doing the same thing, but he's doing it just because it's fun to push buttons. And Cadsuane does it so that people are not pushing hers. She's always the button pusher, just to keep other people from ever stepping in and controlling the situations. Oh man, funny stuff. Another point, and this is the last one I had on this chapter, was dealing with Tylan's death. Matt finds out about it, finds out how gruesome it was, what the golem had done to her, knows that it happened that night while she was tied up and under the bed, and Matt's mind instantly goes to her terror, her fear that her last moments were being helpless, being unable to do anything, cry for help or anything. And Matt feels guilt over this, feels intense guilt over this. Yet the very reason that he tied her up and gagged her and shoved her up under the bed was to protect her.
Yeah.
Matt did what he had to do to protect her from the Seanchan. He had no idea that she would need protection from the golem. I mean, of course, the golem was around, but had not shown up in the Terrace Palace at that point. And in fact, on many of the times, the deaths were happening outside of the city. So that's one of those things that when it comes to feelings of guilt, we should feel guilty for the things we do.
Yeah.
Sometimes we feel guilty for the things we should have done and did not do. But when something is completely out of your control, it seems like those are the situations that cause the most damaging guilt to people.
Yeah, because there's no way you can make amends for it. You weren't you were powerless in the situation to begin with, so you're powerless to do anything to make it up, I think.
Exactly. So
you can't resolve the guilt.
Exactly. That was that was a perfect way of wording it. You cannot resolve the guilt. If it's something you did, you can try to make amends. You can try to reach out. You can do whatever. But like for those who are familiar with the Mistborn series and the Wax and Wayne series that comes after that, a little bit of spoiler warning here. Wayne, who is Waxamilion's sidekick, had murdered a man years before. And so he keeps going to this, dead man's family and giving them money. And it's just the thing he does. Even at one point in one of the books, while the girl is in college, he shows up and is leaving money there at her apartment. And it upsets her. It upsets her mother. They begged him to quit. They have gotten the legal system involved trying to make him quit. He'll put on a disguise and go give him money because he's trying to assuage his guilt for what he did.
Yeah.
And even though, you can't bring a life back, you can do what you can to take care of someone or do something that you feel like can help assuage your guilt if it's something you did or something you failed to do. But when you're completely helpless, something's out of your control, you really had nothing to do with it. And Matt had nothing to do with Tylan's death.
Right.
Matt, here we see he was protecting Tylan. He was helping her. He's doing everything within his power to help her. And yet she was murdered anyway by someone that was after him. And yet he feels more guilt over that than I think having to kill Melindra, his Aiel lover. And that ate him up with guilt. That really bothered Matt.
Mm-hmm.
And we see later on in chapters after this and books after this, he carries those two deaths on his conscience. And it is though Tylan's hurts him worse. I wish we had a way to help people like that. Maybe therapy can. I don't know. I'm not a therapist. I don't know a lot about what it takes. But yeah, it just seems to me like that's the more debilitating guilt that people face, though, is that they cannot in any way make up for. And it may be something that was done to them when they were completely helpless.
Yeah, true.
They cannot resolve it. It's just constantly there. And man, it's so damaging. So that's one of those things, again, RJ saw into human nature enough to weave things like this into the story and have the characters react to it ongoing in the story as people really do.
Yeah.
And I love that. It brings so much realism and really so much beauty to the story.
It does.
It seems like real people going through these things rather than fictional characters.
Yeah. You really feel the impacts reverberating through these characters from a lot of the things that they've done.
Yes.
And there are some times when the writing doesn't feel as strong because you might think, it seems like this person would be thinking about this issue more than they are. Like, I don't see some characters processing some things. No, that's rare, actually. And that's why those points stand out well in this series.
Yes.
Because we're so spoiled with all the characters having trauma, basically, or having other consequences to their actions, or even consequences of things that have been done to them, the consequences of the patterns actions that they're still having to deal with. And I like that you brought up how difficult it must be to treat or help people who have such unresolvable guilt like this, and also shame. Shame tends to get layered on top of that, which is more like I am bad instead of just like I did a bad thing. Like,
so I
if you think about
those as the same thing in my mind, but I see where you're going with that. Yes.
So if you think about shunning as the ultimate kind of punishment for shame, that sort of helps delineate the difference. Because with guilt, you could make something up. You could make some kind of amends. You could try to restore something, some kind of relationship or whatever it is. But with shame, it's just like you get the message that you are bad. So there's not anything you can fix about that. And that's actually one of the big challenges to treating PTSD, is because so many people have shame. You can help treat fear reactions a lot easier, actually. If somebody just has a phobia, that's actually one of the easiest things to treat in psychology. One of the biggest barriers to treating a phobia, just plain fear, intense irrational fear or something, the biggest barrier is just that the person doesn't want to have to go through the scary stuff to treat their fear, so they may not go get treatment. But once you get them in there, behavioral treatments, getting them used to whatever stimulus they're scared of, is actually very predictable and very, very treatable. And you can do that along with anxiety medications, for example, to speed it up a little bit and add some support. With PTSD, it's not often just a fear or set of nightmares of scary things that have happened to you that are recurring. It's often this guilt and shame that you brought up. And so it's often difficult for people to even seek therapy because they're going to think that their therapist will judge them. Like, I'm so disgusting and shameful that I've done this thing or been through this thing that there's no way this person could help me. They're going to judge me too. Military veterans especially struggle with seeking help because they may feel like their therapist, unless the therapist is also a veteran who's seen combat, won't understand the things that they've had to do that they feel ashamed of.
Right.
So, but there are more treatments for this that focus on that. It's called a moral injury, when you feel that you have done something that violates your morals like that, and you're just disgusted and ashamed about it, and that is the cause of your PTSD instead of more of a fear-inducing event. One of the ways of treating this is an emotion called moral elevation that I think people tend to feel from watching videos of people doing stuff like especially heroic, or you hear about a story of somebody doing something so kind for other people that you're moved to this compassion as well. And so that's one avenue that they're using to treat this moral injury in veterans now. And I get that moral elevation feeling at the end of this series, by the way, when Egwene's voice comes to Rand and says something to the extent of, you have to let us be heroes too. You know, like he has to respect everybody else's sacrifices, and understanding that other people did choose to make those courageous sacrifices for the pattern helps him to deal with his horrible PTSD that he's been dealing with, you know, for books and books.
Right.
So it's not really coming back to Matt very well, but I was trying to find a way to bring that full circle, so I brought it to Memory of Light for us to try to put a bow on that idea.
And very good, very good. Because some of these things just don't get resolved with Matt, and
Oh, yeah.
that's not the purpose of the story. Is to have everyone mentally balanced at the end of it. The purpose of the story is just to immerse ourselves in the lives of these what seemingly ordinary people who did such awesome, extraordinary things, and it makes you want to see the best in humanity. I think that's one of the reasons the Wheel of Time community is such a encouraging bunch of people. And again, I've seen a few online trollocs and whatnot on these among the social groups, but for the most part, people are supportive, encouraging, because again, these are people who we've responded to a series that again was to bring out the best of people and the best of humanity and let you see that. So, there's some things I really enjoy, and I know we got very deep and intense there.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just, it's where the story takes us.
Yep, it does. And those were really, you actually hit on all the points I had about this chapter, so I think we had a cool synchrony in a lot of our notes there. So if you're ready, I'll let you go ahead with your summary of chapter 28.
Chapter 28 of Crossroads of Twilight is called A Cluster of Rosebuds. Valen Luca's grand traveling show and magnificent display of marvels left Ibu Dar in rain and mud, which matched Matt's mood perfectly. The show moved slowly and traveled only half a day at a time normally. Luca stopped at every town or any wide spot in the road that promised a few copper coins. And if that did not sour his mood badly enough, one day Matt caught the Aes Sedai sneaking back into camp after having been into a local village, with the 3 Sul'dam following them, of course. Matt stalked to their wagon immediately afterwards and admonished them to all stay in their wagons and away from any towns and any people. Quote, "That's not too much to ask, is it?" End quote. Well, apparently it was. The Aes Sedai kept their hoods up and stayed together, and the 3 Sul'dam followed them as they went and listened in the towns for gossip without speaking to anyone, giving themselves away with their accents. But they all went anyway. And occasionally they came back and shared what gossip they thought he might be interested in. But an even larger worry was Thera. Amathera, the former Panarch of Tarabon, still instantly fell to her knees if she so much as saw a Seanchan. And Matt knew she would give them all away if she came near a Seanchan patrol. So Matt got Noel to follow Julian and her and to give them warning if they were caught out. Matt himself did his best to stay out of the towns where they stopped, and when he did duck quietly into a town, he kept away from dicing. Then, one evening, he talked Egianan into going with him to Tuon's tent to present her a gift. It was a necklace, gold and carved amber, Seanchan made. Tuon looked at it, studied it, and said, "It does not suit me," and turned and gave it to Selucia. Selucia threw it disdainfully to Egianan and told her to put it on. Stiffly Egianan did, and Tuon had Selucia proclaim that Egianan's name was now Lylwyn Shipless. Lylwyn begged permission to leave, and Matt was pretty much thrown out of the wagon. Matt decided that if he was going to court Tuon, he had to do it as if he were using battle tactics. He began playing games of stones against her, and she trounced him. Then he bought a paper flower and brought it with him the next night, but he gave it to Selucia. Tactics, he thought. Put your opponent off balance. Come to think, women in battles were not that different. Both wrapped a man in fog and could kill him without trying, if he was careless. End quote. Every night now he played stones against Tuon and won about half the games. She began to lose herself in the gameplay. Matt brought flowers occasionally, but always for Selucia. Then he bought no flowers for 3 days, but he and Tuon continued to play stones. Then one day he brought a cluster of red silk rosebuds, which looked very real. He put them down next to the board toward Tuon, and that night they played a game of stones to a draw. Tuon reminded Matt that she kept her word not to try to escape, but she wanted to get out and walk some, at night. He could accompany her, of course, which he did. Matt began telling Tuon in their walk about the 2 rivers, as Satelanan and Selucia followed behind them in the dark. On other nights she told him of her life in Seanchan, and how she loved to train horses and damane. The show folks started avoiding Matt during these days. He was supposed to be Egianan's lover, after all, but was now spending lots of time with Tuon, clearly courting her. Discussing that with Lyle shipless over a game of stones, she asked, "You can't think she'll complete this ceremony, can you? You can't be that big a fool." Not understanding, she explained that in Xianqian customs, a marriage ceremony involved the man proclaiming publicly 3 times that the bride was his wife, and she proclaimed 3 times that he was her husband. Matt had already stated 3 times that Tuon was his wife back on the night when they were trying to leave Ibu Dar. When Matt laughed uncomfortably that Tuon hadn't responded, so obviously it didn't mean anything, Lylwyn shipless explained that as long as they both did so in the presence of witnesses within a year and a day, it was a legal marriage. Matt dropped the playing stones. He hadn't known. He had not known. But Tuon did know. She was toying with him. She was getting ready to set a hook as if he were a fish, and she was going to reel him in whenever she wanted. A few days later, the show reached the river Eldar and had to cross at a ferry just a few wagons at a time. The dice began rattling in Matt's head when Xianqian's soldiers were there on both sides of the river, perhaps 1,000 of them in all. Tuon sat out on her wagon, bundled against the cold, and said not one word. She could have called for rescue, but she did not. Yes, she had definitely set the hook in Matrim Cawthon, and she knew it. So that night she asked Matt for one more thing. She was about to reel him in now. The dice stopped as soon as she asked. Thus ends chapter 28, A Cluster of Rosebuds.
I love this chapter, though. I had been looking forward to this one. I didn't remember exactly where it was, but I remember my first time reading it and becoming so endeared to their romance story. And I did not expect this at all. I did not expect to get invested, but I love the Stones games. I love the gifts to Lucia. I love when she initiates them going out on walks.
Yes,
every bit of it. And I remember, so the first time I read this was sometime in 2018. It's probably been close to 2 years now. It was around 2 years, and I texted you after I read this chapter specifically, and I think I said something like, "Man, why is Matt and Tuon's romance the best one in the series so far, LOL." And you were like, no, I think Perrin and Fael's is the best. But I guess what I meant by it was this one felt the most natural to me so far of like anybody as far as getting together. It still started with antagonism. There had to be a fight. They started with jujitsu, but they're actually sort of falling for each other now. And it's hard to tell to what degree Tuon is romantically interested in him. She seems more curious, intrigued. I don't really know what she's feeling. And
Right.
That fact keeps her in a position of power here. And he is realizing that in this chapter for sure. Yeah. Before even knowing the whole situation with the how the marriage vows work, I think he still was feeling that she was in a position of power even though she's the prisoner, because he is starting to really fall for her. But the fact that she's like giggling and so excited over the Stones games and everything, I think she is really into him.
Yeah, and she is. I did not see that my first time through. I really didn't. I don't know why that it didn't seem like they were really falling in love. To me, it seemed like they were more just studying one another, like they were playing a game of Stones with their lives,
Yep.
and dealing with the prophecy. And we've already discussed that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Had the Aelfinn never said that to Matt, he never would have thought he needed to marry the daughter of the Nine Moons. I don't know. Perhaps it would have happened anyway, and this accelerated things, but we don't know. But I can't see him going down that path of trying to keep her around and falling in love with her and all these things just by being around her, if he had not known of that prophecy. So, but at the same time, this time through, when I'm really studying it, taking my time to listen on my reread, I am catching a lot more of that I just didn't see the first time through. First time through, I thought it was more of a curiosity for one another, and now I do see it as more of a genuine, starting with the curiosity, and it's starting to grow. And I didn't see that growth and that blossoming before. But again, I was fighting to get through the series.
Yep.
I've gone for so many
And this book in particular is
Yes.
a tough one. I think it's one of the toughest ones to get through for most folks. And so when you're here at the end of it, you're probably just trying to race to get to the end of this book and get to the next one.
But I don't have a whole lot to add on this one. One little note I did have when Matt goes to Noel and asks him, can you follow Julian and Thera and just kind of keep them out of trouble? Or let us know, bring us warning if she starts falling down in front of some Seanchan and, spills the whole story. And Noel just reaches in under his coat, like he's holding one of the knives that he keeps there, and says, are you sure it wouldn't just be better to make sure she can't talk to anyone? And that is so horrifying to me.
Yep.
I mean, we've discussed Noel's story and the way he has compromised with the dark, and we don't know the full extent of that, but we know there are things and hints and clues come out in the story as it goes. But just to say that so openly, well, when I say openly, not in public, but to say it even openly to one person in private like that, where it's very clear, oh yeah, I'll just kill her if you want her quiet. And that's so horrifying to me, because most of the time I don't see Noel that way. I see him as this, funny old man that is, he loves to fish, and he, loves to play snakes and foxes with Oliver, and he loves to regale all the people with his stories. And you don't see him as being someone who could just casually go murder a woman to keep her quiet.
Yeah.
But he's a man with some history.
Yep, he's seen some things. He's done some things. We don't know much of them.
Right.
There's a lot of things he didn't put in that book.
Exactly. And to have said it that way, you get the feeling that would not be the first murder he'd done, just to keep someone quiet. When he was compromised by the dark, I guess once you start down that road, you forever will dominate your destiny.
Yeah.
To quote
Yoda.
We
we don't only see dark friends with this type of logic, though.
Right.
Now, Thera is more of an innocent victim, potential victim, than we could hear about, or that we have heard about. But there are similar proposals brought up in this series. I find it an interesting reversal that Matt was one of the first. Matt was one of the first when he was taking care of Rand on the road to Camelin because of Rand's channeling sickness.
Right.
And Millie Skane, we now know her to be, came to try to kill them both. And Matt went, once they had dispatched her, Matt was ready to kill her. And Rand's like, we're not like them.
Right.
That's what they would do. We're going to let her go. So Matt he was Dagger Matt. That's why. But Dagger Matt was ready to go ahead and dispose of somebody very quickly. Now, that's somebody who was trying to kill them. So that is very different. That's a step up from self-defense. A little preemptive self-defense there, if you will, to prevent against future attacks. But we also see, also not on the side of the dark, Tuon brings up a similar proposal to Egwene. When Egwene, around the same time in this series too, maybe a book or two ago, but I don't even remember which of the novices or accepted it is that is sort of blackmailing Egwene.
Right.
But Tuon's like, we could get rid of this problem if you want us to. Yeah. And Egwene is like, I feel kind of gross that I was tempted for a moment, but that's not how we just deal with problems. We don't just get people out of our way. And it makes you go, man, I was very sympathetic to Tuon back when she was deposed and everything, but now I wonder how shady was her leadership.
Right. Yeah.
Did she get very corrupted by that over time? I don't know.
Yeah, there is a huge step, not a fine line. It's a huge chasm between thinking about it, joking about, we could just get rid of this problem, this person, and actually taking steps to do it. Again, Tuon, you're right. I had forgotten about that moment, and I cannot recall who they were talking about now either. Mm-hmm. But it really made you feel like she had perhaps had that done before.
Yeah. Now, I think it was Nicola. I think
probably
Nicola was one who was on the ship with Nynaeve and Elaine when they were pretending to be Aes Sedai before they got to Saladar.
Right.
And that was when Maragon or whoever that was really Mo Gideon was also on the ship. She was one of the people they picked up. So yeah, it's Nicola that's blackmailing her, saying, I'm going to tell everybody you're friends and you were pretending to be Aes Sedai and y'all are going to get in trouble. So I guess it didn't really matter who it was. Sorry, but it just came to me.
And we know the Aes Sedai can't do that because of the three oaths, but any Aes Sedai with a warder can instruct him to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm sure they've used that loophole. You get the sense that they probably have once we learn that.
I don't recall it ever being pointed out in the show, or the series rather. Mm-hmm. But I recall several times when I've thought, they can't do that. And I think, wait, she has a warder. and there's different times that the warders have acted like, I could take care of this, and
Yes.
they could. They're
Lan
violence
has. There's a
incarnate.
time when Lan will give Moiraine a look in like Eye of the World, and she's like,
Yes.
no, we don't have to do that. Or maybe it was I know that happens in the Dragon Reborn at some point too.
Yes.
So
So,
yeah. It's not
yeah.
just our dark friends who consider unsavory
Right.
ways of getting obstacles out of their way, I
Right.
think.
Well, and I know of people. I mean, I've had to put up with knuckleheads at work. And we would kind of joke about. I think we could hook them up to 110 and we could take care of this problem. And you say things like that, you joke about things like that, but there's a huge, huge chasm between what passes through your mind of I would like to get rid of this headache, this problem, and taking steps to actually do it. That's two very, very different things. And
Yep.
The fact that Noel would so casually seem to be willing to take that step, and again, Tuon would be so willing to take this step, makes you think they've probably done it, because that would be the only people who could. Well, let me take it back. The only people who could do that and not really seem to bother them are either psychopaths or people who have done that and been able to justify it in their minds, so it didn't really bother them, didn't haunt them.
Right.
Most
So maybe they
people
killed out of self-defense at some
Right.
point. They justified enough where they
Yeah.
people
Kinda get
can
hardened
rationalize
against that.
anything after the fact. A lot of people can.
Yeah. So anyway, just my thoughts on it, because I know a lot
Yeah.
of people who have had to take lives in military situations, and they struggle with that. They really, really struggle with that. And some people don't. They can justify it. They can move on with their lives. And these two made me think they've done some very shady things, and they've found a way to kind of process it, deal with it, move on with their lives. And it makes them a little scary when you stop and think about that.
That was one of my few short notes about this chapter as well, was the Noel thing. So I'm glad you brought that up, because it really does stand out, since I went on for so long last episode of going, I've got my eye on him. I don't know where he's going when he's not around. So really I don't have a lot left. I know we've had kind of a long one today, but I did have a couple more notes on this chapter. One of them is just about all the responsibilities that Matt is dealing with. And I know I've alluded to this as well a little bit earlier, so why Egyanan, or now Lalawan Shipless, would not be the appropriate party to be responsible here in this situation. But I mean, Matt's got a lot on his back, a lot of people on his back, just in these two chapters. A lot of people who need things from him, a lot of situations that need him to be in charge. And it's sort of making me almost forget why I wanted so bad for him to get out of Abu Dar.
Yes.
Because now he's just out of the frying pan and into the fire. I think Tuon is the great bright spot here. So that being the big focus of a lot of our notes on this chapter, I think is a great point. But boy, it's looking rough for him in the beginning. When he's thinking to himself about how the rain is really matching his mood, and it's just icky outside, and all the while he's dealing with Luca being on his back about money. He's got Egyanan challenging his leadership every time he turns around. Doman on his back about how he treats Egyanan and how he treats Tuon. He's got Tuon and Selusha, who he's worried they could raise some kind of alarm. He's starting to get reassured about them by this chapter, but he's been dealing with these feelings. He's got the Aes Sedai and the Suldam constantly making their problems his problems too.
Yes.
And their problems, like the Aes Sedai having to be in there with the Suldam, very big deal. I'm not trying to minimize their problems, but Matt is also having to deal with this as a leader. Jolene, he's got to deal with her telling and not asking him to change the direction of their entire trip.
Right.
He's got to deal with not only the Aes Sedai and Suldam pitted against each other, stuck in the wagon, but also how they're going to be acting weird out in public and getting him in trouble, maybe by drawing too much attention. He's got Oliver to look after. He's got Thera, as Noel noted, who could really blow their cover. So the list just really goes on and on about the worries that Matt has here, the people that he's got who need things from him. And I'm not envying him at this moment. No. So I'm glad he's got these diversions with Tuon to take up his time, because otherwise these would be some really miserable chapters here with the circus.
But it does kind of show some things about Matt's character, in that you begin to really understand who a person is when they're under stress. I've heard people say things like never marry somebody until you've been with them when the internet goes out, or something like that. You see how people react under stressful situations. And that's kind of what they're going through here. You're seeing how Matt reacts. So we're really seeing more and more about Matt, about who he is, about his personality, by the way he handles these things. And he gets frustrated and he wants to beat his head against the side of a wagon and pull his hair out, but he does it in true Matt fashion. His thoughts are, zigzagging back and forth, and then suddenly he takes an action, to change things. And it's so funny to me that Tuon and Solution don't hand him problems so much as they just confuse the heck out of him.
Yeah.
He does not understand anything about Seancing culture. He never goes to Egyanan or Lylwyn at this point and asks her to explain it. Hey, explain to me what, why they're acting this way and why this is upsetting you.
Because that would give her some of the power, right?
Right.
If he had to rely on her for anything, there's no way he could do that. He's got to save face with her.
Exactly. So he just has to keep barging ahead, pretending like he's doing all this intentionally. When truly he's not. And I find this hilariously funny, just the tension that builds there. Yeah.
Speaking of misunderstanding Tuon and Solutia, I mean, I think they're not really coming to him with problems, like you said. It's more like, but that's having to take up part of his brain space, is figuring them out, in addition to all these worries he has and people needing him for stuff. But I think I understood part of chapter 3 better after I read chapter 28 and took notes on it. I think I get part of why Tuon was so incensed, so upset about being supposedly a faithless thieving servant. Because in this chapter we see her rename Lylwyn, and that is who she is now. Once she called her shipless, I mean, that demotes her right away. She is, her eyes are lowered, I guess, as they would say.
Yes, absolutely.
So we see that in their culture, it's like naming a thing or naming a person makes it so. And so that's why he had to assure Tuon, and this did calm her down, like, nobody's saying you actually have to be a servant, okay? It's just it's a fake story. I can't change it now. But that's why she was so upset, because she was being, the daughter of the Nine Moons, the daughter of the Empress, who can't be proclaimed anything by anybody else, really, other than somebody else of the high blood in the royal family. She's being proclaimed to be a thieving, faithless servant, and she doesn't know how to handle that information.
Yes,
you don't just casually use nicknames or whatever. You name things what they are, and she's naming her toy what he is. That's just what the station is. It's almost like little kids when they first acquire language.
That's what I thought of.
Yeah, when you name a thing, that's what it is. So they will get so upset about, mispronouncing something.
Yes.
I just keep thinking about one of my uncles calling Pocahontas Pocapenalia when I was a little kid and being so upset about that. That's not right. It's wrong. Or, if you call somebody a poopy head or something, it's just devastating because it means that's what they are now.
Right. They can't just say it's just a word. Right? If you say it, it makes it real, more or less. Right. Oh, I had not thought of that in terms of why Tuon was angry about that. I thought it was because, they're calling her a servant. But it was a faithless servant. That's really what got her, because then you're saying she's not a person of her word. She can go impersonating a servant if that fits her narrative or what she's trying to do, but you do not call her faithless. Oh, that's funny. That's funny. All right, so join us next episode as we take a deep dive into Matt Cawthon's head in chapter 29 of Crossroads of Twilight.
Subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, currently still Google Play for now, Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, and that one's under the name Lajara Dane, Lajaradayne, to get notified when a new episode drops every Wednesday. Leave us feedback by rating and reviewing on your preferred podcast listening platform, or by contacting us through email at lajaradane@gmail.com, or on Twitter at mind_wheel, or you can reach me personally on Twitter at Lajara Sedai, that's Sedai. This is not the ending to the turning in the Wheel of Mind, but it is an ending.
And there are 3 things I've learned never to discuss with people: religion, politics, and the Great Pumpkin.
Nice.